Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition, where we take you back to the good old days, just maybe not quite how you expect from our title. I am Megan Cox.
And I am Clayton Becker. And Megan, we've been gone for a week. We had some, actual job stuff that we were doing, but
Right?
we promised people when we came back that we were going to talk about something a little more optimistic, something that's more within our power to change. So, what is this episode going to be about? What are we talking about today?
Well, today we are rejecting loneliness and embracing hanging out.
Embracing hanging out. Well, I will point out we thought of calling this episode Reject Loneliness, Embrace Starting a Podcast. But decided against it because not everyone wants to start a podcast with their friends. Not everyone needs to start a podcast with their friends.
Weekly with their friends is like kind of gonna jump down to the solutions component of this episode. But anyway,
how did we get here? Why do we need to reject loneliness in the first place? What's happening with loneliness broadly in American society? Like, people have a general idea of this, but maybe we should give it like some clear contours.
People have a general idea that they feel less socially connected than they did previously. And the data do bear that out. According to Pew Research, a majority of Americans report that they have between 1 and 4 close friends, and 36% say they have 5 or more close friends. 8% say they have no close friends. That is, I believe, from 2023, so post-pandemic. Gallup found similar. In 2021, they found that 12% of respondents say they did not have any close friends, up from 3% in 1990. Older people are more likely to say that they have 5 or more close friends, and seniors appear more likely to have maintained friendships over time, while young people appear to be more likely to make new friends. According to the Survey Center on American Life, that all makes sense. You know, you get to a certain point, you've maintained relationships over time, whereas young people are in the stage of their lives where they are meeting people in the sorts of places where you make friends.
Yeah, and I think the important thing, or not the important, but one of the important things about all of those numbers is 12% might not sound like a lot, like 8% might not sound like a lot, but like it is 1 in every 10 people, right, is saying that they don't have any close friends. And what's even more, I think, important to understand is that, like, it's the distribution of friendships that's like really concerning, because for every one of those, those 10% of people roughly that don't have any close friends, you've got another 10%, another 15% who only have 1 or 2 close friends, right? And with the way that American social connectedness is declining, you have that 3% that used to be in like the far tail of the distribution of no friends. And now you're like moving towards the center of the distribution. And if that trend continues, where we have this declining social connectedness in the American public, then you reach like pretty quickly a situation where, because it's like exponential growth up to like the 50% part of the curve, right? Where you have 20%, 30%, 40% of the American public reporting they have either 0 or only 1 close friend. And that is just like a completely atomized society where you like just do not have any like really positive, consistent personal interactions on a day-to-day basis with people that you feel like you know and you trust. And that's like really, really kind of like post-apocalyptic levels of like bad shit.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of bad consequences from this. Just to pick out one, though, kind of interconnected aspect of this that we might not be thinking about, the trend with delayed marriage in the United States also winds up meaning that people are more reliant on their friend groups for emotional support, or are more reliant on their family, on their parents or siblings. And then this is a trend also identified by the Survey Center on American Life, that young men are more likely to be reliant on their parents to the extent that they don't have those close friend groups, are not socialized to rely on those friend groups in the same way that women are necessarily, and are delaying marriage, so don't have a spouse to kind of take on that emotional burden for them. And I do want to say, as a disclaimer, this is not an episode about the, quote, male loneliness epidemic, unquote. That's
Yeah.
not what we're doing here.
Yeah, we're talking about like the decline in American social connectedness here. We're not talking about incels. Like
No, no, no,
it's
no. Well,
yeah.
see, the problem just as a quick, like, why we're not talking about it. Um, a lot of things get mashed together when we talk about the male loneliness epidemic. The part of it that we are talking about is the part that affects everyone, which is declines in social connectedness across the board. It affects men maybe more strongly than women because, again, women are socialized to prioritize emotional connection with others a bit more than men are. I don't think that's a controversial statement. But when we start talking about, inceldom or internet culture, that activates different people in different ways. Additionally, when we start talking about economic causes of male loneliness, men aren't making as much money and don't have good jobs, so they stay in the basement at their parents. Um, that activates a group of, especially women, including me, in particular ways, because what that sounds like to a lot of women is that women have gotten so good at adding in extra effort to overcome gender-based discrimination or to avoid gender-based discrimination. We've gotten so good at it that it's not fair to the men anymore, that we're succeeding so much in a society that was actually built for them and for their benefit. That's how it sounds to a lot of women. And so it's kind of a conversation ender. So that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about interconnectedness and social interaction, not about potential economic covariates or
Yeah,
consequences.
we're talking about the dimensions of loneliness that are one, not like, quite frankly, to be perfectly honest with you, not to be an asshole, but a little bit to be an asshole. Not the parts that are skill issues. Like, if you can't form platonic friendships with women, like maybe consider some self-improvement. We're talking about the parts that are like broad-based, societally focused, and the parts that have the same solutions, basically, for both men and for women, right?
Absolutely.
We're talking about the broader challenge here, not the one that, is not going to result in a productive conversation.
Absolutely. So let's talk about where people make friends, because this is an important component of this, I think. Um, People make friends in places where they have repeated, unplanned interactions. And what I mean by that is, if you're at school or you're at work and you just run into the same person every day over and over again, and you get to know their coffee order and you get to know what they like for lunch and you get to have inside jokes about things and you just develop a friendship in a unintentional way. And I think a lot of the advice about making friends is really more like deliberate, and that's just not how friendships develop.
Yeah, I think like all of us can sort of think about like the ways that we met our closest friends today, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like none of us met them at like the friendship making convention, right? Like we met them because we were assigned to the same room at summer camp, or we met them because we were assigned to the same like, dormitory in freshman year. We met them because we had English class together in 7th grade, right? Like we met them because we had a previous friend who invited them over when we were doing a game night, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you don't meet people like hardly anyone meets people like and actually forms these like really strong friendships in the like way that the, self-help friendship courses would say that you ought to.
Absolutely not. And I mean, there's a certain extent of like, I met, friends at an orientation for something, something like that, where there's sort of an icebreaker component because it's everybody's just moved into their college dorm or whatever. But then it is the repeated interaction. And the data really do show that this is the case. Again, according to the Survey Center on American Life, 54% of respondents say they have made a close friend at work. 47% say they made a close friend through school. 40% say through friends. That's the friend of a friend kind of situation that you just described. Somebody invites a friend of theirs over for a social event or something and you become their friend. 35% say living in the same neighborhood. 21% say through a place of worship, which is, again, that's a regularly scheduled interaction where you just interact with people on a frequent basis. 19% say through a club or organization, which is usually where people tell you to go to make friends. And 10%, 16% of adults with children living in the home made friends through their children. So you and your kid is on a soccer team and you make friends with the other parents at the soccer team.
Yeah.
Sort of situation.
I was thinking there, Megan, do you think we count as work friends or school friends?
Oh, man. School?
Yeah, right? Because like we were
started.
Yeah, the first year of the PhD program is very much more school than work, right?
But that's a great example of, and I give UCLA a lot of guff for various things, but the idea that first years don't get quote offices unquote, we all have to hang out in the lounge together. It's very intentional that we all have to hang out in the lounge together to make friendships. Basically, they're making us become friends with each other.
They're making us have these regular, unscheduled, like non-formal interactions with each other. And it does work. I mean, there's a group of us in the cohort. I don't know if I've told you about this. There's 6 of us that are working on a paper together. And I feel like that doesn't happen if all the first years have our own offices. Like it just doesn't occur.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I have not been to a program that has offices, like solo offices for first years. It's either you have desks, but you're in a big room together, or a situation like ours with the lounge. So to the extent that it might have been unintentional, it was lucky that the space constraints of the university worked out the way that they did. But that's the sort of repeated interaction that really helps you develop a friendship. Now, some more stats. 69% of Americans say they have situational friendships, where they see someone at a particular place or time and nowhere else. This is your work friend that you eat lunch with or go for walks with, but you don't see them outside of work necessarily.
You're not like inviting them out, on different nights or inviting them over to your place or whatever. And I think all of us have this kind of like sort of curse. All of us, quote unquote, 69% of Americans 69%
of us have a strong supermajority have a situational friendship. And then 51% have a friend that they spend time with doing a particular activity, such as, sports or community service. You have a friend that you just play badminton with. And nothing else, because you have no other friends who want to play badminton.
And I think it's important to note the distinction here between the 19% of people who say they met friends through a club or organization and the 51% of people who say they spend time with someone doing a particular activity like sports or community service, right? Because you can meet people outside of these organizations, outside of these clubs, and then decide that you are going to do things with them, separately, right? Or you can like figure out that like, oh, well, the kind of like activity that we jive while we're doing is this kind of sports or community activity, right? Like not all friends need to be everything to everyone all the time, right? Like
Absolutely.
It's okay to have friends that are not your close friends, but that you are still friendly with. And I think lots of people are not quite making that distinction, right? Like I've noticed this in just my personal life, right? That like there are people, who like, for lack of better terms, are kind of like, well, oh, if I wouldn't like, if I'm not a ride or die for you, then like I don't want to spend a lot of time with you. I don't want to waste my time with people who, I'm not like super close with. And it's like, well, no, right? Like that's not a particularly good way to go through the world. Like
absolutely.
And I think a lot of people are thinking like I only want friendships that are like super close and fulfilling. And like you should have those friendships, but that shouldn't be the only kind of friendship that you're willing to spend time on.
I think a lot of people are looking for that kind of found family sort of friendship from everybody, and that you don't necessarily need that, especially as you move through life.
For everyone who's not watching this on a visual medium, that ow from Megan was her dog jumping up on her lap.
Just nibbling on my fingers because I didn't have a rawhide for her to chew on, and now I do. So we are in good shape. This is, like I kind of joke about her being a little bit of a pain, but she's also like how I know my neighbors is I walk around the neighborhood with her and meet people. I have friends whose names I don't know, but I'm like, oh, I see you every morning at about 9 a.m., you know? And that's a repeated interaction that is just like just a little bit more social.
So if we're thinking that like these repeated interactions, these unscheduled, unplanned interactions that form friendships are what indeed sort of have people meet new people and form friendships in the first place, why has that declined? Um, how did we get to a point where those interactions are not happening like they used to?
There are a number of possible components to this. One that is often cited is the decline of third places.
What is a
And
third place, Megan?
I was going to say, as our urban design expert, do you want to take that away?
Sure. So a third place is basically a place that is not like work or the home where you see people. It can also include like work or school or the home if you're like a young person who's not in the working world yet. But the long story short is that a third place is any location that is not your like work sphere or your home sphere. So it's places like coffee shops and public parks, places like bars, right? Places where people like come together, congregate, and like meet and do things, right? Public squares, right? Really big all over Europe, for example. Like you see the sort of like super blocks in Barcelona that are all built around these like central courtyards where people meet and do things, right? So the decline of third places essentially refers to the idea that there are fewer of these places where people are sort of naturally going to gather and naturally going to have these interactions. There are various reasons why people have posited that this has happened. Part of it is sort of the atomization of suburbia, the fact that people are in their vehicles going between spots more often than not, right? The fact that there are fewer like restaurant-ish establishments that are like bars or coffee shops where it's sort of like a communal area, communal space. Like if you look at sort of restaurants in Europe relative to restaurants here in the United States, you've got like people sitting next to each other or like really long sort of friends and family style tables in lots of places in Europe. Whereas here in the United States is very much like everyone has their own booth, right? And there's this dividing line. This big thing that goes nearly up to the ceiling, right? Or taller than anyone while they're sitting down at the very least in these booths to separate people from each other while they're eating, right? So all of this has contributed to the decline of these third places. And then also there's just a more specific decline in the like access that people have to like free third places. So where you don't have to go and spend money in order to spend time at the third place. Yeah.
There's often kind of a conflation of this debate when we talk about, oh, we don't have enough third places. Sometimes people kind of subset that and say, we don't have enough third places that are not about spending money or where you don't have to spend money. And that's true. A decline in spending on public services often means things like the parks aren't as nice or you don't have a community center, etc. But when you insert a profit motive into your third places, that can make it less conducive to the communal connection that you're looking for. If you just want to sit around and chat at the coffee shop or at the restaurant, you may have waitstaff who want to turn the table and get somebody else in there who's buying more stuff. Or you've got a property manager at the mall who doesn't want to include benches in kind of the courtyard because the benches don't really help you sell anything. And in fact, if you get the wrong type of person hanging out on the bench, it may be diminishing sales in their opinion. So you don't have a space where you can just go and hang out. I want to plug the Century City Mall as like the nicest place I've ever sat to study because they have all these like couches and everything. But you can have those kind of communal gathering spaces, and having those sort of decline means you have fewer places to hang out with people once you have established connections and have realized that you do want to spend time with people.
Yeah, but I think it's important to understand that like this decline in third places is in fact like relatively recent, right? Like Megan, I think when you were doing the research for this episode, I can't remember the citation off the top of my head, but you found a paper that like sort of tried to trace the timeline here, right?
Yeah.
So what was the? From remembering the finding properly, maybe I should just not pontificate about what the finding is. Maybe you should just tell us what it was.
It was, yeah, you want me to jump in? It was actually the Great Recession that started this. It was like 2008, 2009. I think the paper was written around like 2013. And so it's not the pandemic, although we're going to talk about the pandemic and what it did in a second. It is, I think if you cast your mind back, I know I'm older than you, but you really saw a decline in like commercial real estate, I think, and malls in particular were kind of like the decaying mall was the emblem of that situation for a lot of people. You had all kinds of vacancy, and the more vacancy you have, the fewer people you have, and kind of the less safe a place feels. We've talked about eyes on the street theory.
Yeah.
And just it feels eerie to be in a place with all of these closed up shops. And that was really kind of the decline of using commercial centers as just a gathering place.
And I think also you see that this happens like right around the exact same time, maybe a little bit before, that you finally begin to have like online virtual spaces
Yes.
be like an actual like closer analog and substitute for a physical third place. Because prior to the Great Recession, early 2000s, don't know how old most of our audience is, but like the online spaces that you had were like chat rooms and like instant messaging, like AOL's Instant Messenger, right? That was sort of the extent of these online third places, right? But fast forward a decade to the early 2000s, right? Like you have like live gameplay that you can do where you can actually play with your friends online in your own homes, right? And then like fast forward a decade after that to, you know, basically today, you've got like virtual reality and you've got like all of these different platforms that exist online for people to like just spend time with each other in those third places on the internet. And like that's fine, I think, like for people to do that and to want to spend time with each other playing video games and doing things that they enjoy. But it just simply is not a substitute for the kinds of like routine social interactions that used to drive like new friendships and like cross-cutting friendships with people. Because when you're forming these kinds of friendships online, when you're interacting with people on the internet, you're not developing new friendships, right? Most of the time. You're not developing like friendships with people who
Yes.
are somewhat dissimilar from yourself, right? Like you're making friends with people who at the very least have a like clear interest in the same kind of like video games or online spaces that you spend time in, which we know from a lot of the research on this like are pretty balkanized spaces, right? And so when we talk about social connectedness, it's not just the number of friendships that you have, but the variety of friendships that you have, right? You make a greater variety of friendships hanging out with people in real life, quote unquote, as opposed to solely finding people that you jive with on the internet. Like again, it's not a like strictly negative thing, but the fact that we saw this decline in physical third places at the same time that digital third places became this like better substitute for them has meant that we see this like perpetual decline and a self-reinforcing decline in people even wanting to use these physical third places in the first place. Because as we mentioned, like a lot of this is that these places are not easily accessible by people, specifically not easily accessible by like younger people who maybe can't drive or don't have a car of their own, because you don't live within walking distance of these places in the suburbs and all of that.
Yeah.
So
like
yeah,
I'm not mad at, you know, my former partner's teenage son would play Fortnite and be on with his little middle school friends. And that's not really materially different from me coming home from school and then calling my friends on the phone and sitting around and talking to them, despite the fact that we just spent 8 hours of the school day together. Basically the same thing. But yeah, you're not making additional new friends. And actually, you know, parents are probably very wary of random people that their kids are talking to in, you know, whatever the voice chat equivalent is of a video game. That would, you know, you'd be a little like, okay, who's this person talking to my kid? What's going on? Additionally, you know, as we speak about third spaces and their decline, like often American culture is not designed for hanging out. most people don't go to the pub for a quick pint on their way home from work. I think most people would kind of go like, "Oh my god, you go to the bar every night on your way home from work? Are you okay?" Kind of thing. Not to get into like the relative health of that kind of habit, or like alcohol in specifically like UK society is not good either, but you're spending time with people who are not your family or your coworkers. Sometimes you're going with your coworkers a lot of the time, but you go to work, you go home, especially if you are married or have children. And that kind of culture makes it much harder to maintain friendships. Additionally, if we're speaking specifically about alcohol consumption, the lack of transit options
Yeah.
makes it much less likely. As yay, drunk driving has declined. That's awesome. But people are not going to the bar because they don't want to try to drive home afterwards.
And I think the car bit of this is really important, because when we're talking about social connectedness and social cohesion, we're not just talking about people who you consider friends, right? We're talking about people who you are familiar with and people who you just consider acquaintances, right? Like the decline in
Wait, do
social.
you have bus friends?
I have like one bus friend that I would say like I see at the bus stop relatively frequently.
See on the bus all the time. I had a bus friend who I just saw on the
Yeah,
bus.
I don't know this person's name. We've only spoken a couple of times, but like we like know that both of us are like normal human beings who are not going to do anything like weird or crazy, right?
Mhm.
And I think like, that kind of like knowing other people in your general vicinity. Like when we talk about social connectedness, right? Like the decline of social capital, it is about like this fear of other people, right? And this belief that other people are not important, right? Or that you shouldn't do things for other people. I mean, we've talked about this recently, right? Like this broad-based decline in the idea that you have societal obligations to other people who you are not necessarily close friends with and do not know well, right? Like I think most of us, if not all of us, are willing to like make certain sacrifices or inconvenience ourselves to help our friends, right? Like people who we are close with. We're willing to help them move. We're willing to like drive them places if, their cars in the shop or something, right? Like we're willing to do things that are not necessarily like, this is good for me, as long as it's good for someone who we're close with, who are friends. But it used to be that there was at least this like, social level lip service to the idea that you would do things because they were good for people or society in general. And I think that this decline in social cohesion, where people have bus friends or they have people they see in the neighborhood while they're walking to and from work, directly contributes to that fact that we don't have this sort of broad-based social cohesion, this broad-based idea that you do things sometimes for other people, even if it is going to inconvenience you personally. And yeah, like cars are a big part of that. Like people going to and from work, never seeing anyone else outside of the work or the home. Like it's a whole deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the pandemic made it worse in many ways. We have talked in previous episodes about how the pandemic just kind of frayed everybody's willingness to do things for other people. But the pandemic really seems to be a turning point in that the default is to stay home rather than go out. And that is in every aspect of life now. We have created a situation where grocery delivery is normal, food delivery is normal. You don't necessarily have to leave your home to go to work or school. And bailing on plans, it seems, became much, much more acceptable post pandemic. I don't know if that's your kind of take. I don't have any data on that, but it really feels like something changed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a great frame of reference for it because the plans that I was making before the pandemic were all with college friends.
Yeah,
And
okay,
then
fair.
post pandemic it's been, working life and being in the PhD. So like I don't know what was a normal amount of bailing on plans to happen back then. But also I will say, like I have very deliberately cultivated a like outside of my home social life over like the last couple of years at the very least, right? Like especially because I went like from the regular social interactions of college to the like no social interactions of the pandemic, like extremely quickly, right? Um, I have, since the pandemic has, been less of a concern, and since I've been in this doctorate program, tried very, very hard to make sure, because the PhD can be such an isolating experience, we've talked about before, like to cultivate this, like doing things with friends at least once or twice a week, right? And we'll talk about that when we get into the back half. But I think like
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
experience might not be like representative of the
No, but
average
more
level of
people
bailing
should be
on
like
plans.
you.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. I am the perfect American. Thank you, Megan.
you are. Yes, you're welcome. You heard it here first. So you've got all of that kind of this the social tendencies sort of changing, but also increases in remote work reduce the ability to make work friends. And as we spoke about like half an hour ago now, work friends are important.
Yeah,
And work friends, you
54% of
make friends
people.
at work.
It is the number one thing that people say, they make friends at work. Yeah.
Yep,
Even more
absolutely.
so than school or through other friends.
Yes, you are making work friends. I will speak to this I think in the back half, but like making work friends is good. But we also see kind of a change in how we understand individual personality traits. I think this is the last kind of change in society that we really want to talk about here. There's a conflation of introversion with being antisocial. And as much I am an introvert, I get my social energy I get my energy from being alone, not from being with other people. And being with other people depletes that energy. That doesn't mean that I don't have social skills. It also doesn't mean that you can't learn social skills if you are a introvert. But in the process of introverts taking their power back, quote unquote, you see a sort of like acceptance of the idea that you don't need to be social, or sort of a diminishment of the importance of social connection. And that's not the point. And also it is, it's a societal shift. It used to be, well, if you are not someone who is willing to be social, that's kind of sad. That's a little like, you should try to be social. And you need to both respect yourself or your friends who don't get energy from being around other people. But also those people do also need to be engaging socially because it is actually important to them, even if it is diminishing their energy level. If you're in a place where you think you don't want to hang out with anybody, it's probably the most important time for you to go
Yeah.
hang out with people.
And I think to this point,
And yeah,
so I think to this point, like being social is something that like you develop faculties at over time, right?
it is a muscle. I have it
Yeah,
written in my notes. It is a muscle. You have to train it.
like my mom is a Presbyterian minister, right? And so she has to do a lot of social interaction. But she is also an introvert in that she gets her energy from sitting quietly in the living room reading a book, right? But over the many years that she has been in that role, right? Like she has had to cultivate this ability to interact socially with people, even though that's not what brings her energy in the way that it is with like me and my dad, right? Um, and I think that like, she would be the first one to admit, maybe we'll get her to admit when we bring her on for our Mother's Day special or something, right? That like that has been good for her, right? Like interacting with people has been good for her in a way that, if she were to just be sitting in the living room reading all the time, it wouldn't be good for her, right? Just in terms of like living both a fulfilling life, a connected life, and having a support network of people who know her and care about her and can help her with things when she needs assistance. You know what I mean? So I think that's sort of the other part here of like, yes, I again, not as like an extreme extrovert, right? I cannot identify with the introvert sentiment, but I think like hopefully in the same way that I think an extrovert like myself should be able to recognize the value of just sitting alone and relaxing for a little bit, right? And just like gathering yourself. Introverts should be able to recognize the value of talking with other people, interacting socially, and like having a group of friends.
Absolutely. And if the pandemic didn't convince introverts that they were less introverted than they thought, nothing will ever do so. It was an experience for me. I'm like, oh, maybe I need to rethink my entire approach to life because I'm by myself constantly. My partner would come home and I'd be, what'd you do? Who'd you see? Who'd you talk to? What's going on? Like, oh dear, this poor man. Anyway, so that's really, where we are as a society. We've kind of stopped treating making friends as important. We've made it harder to make and spend time with friends. But it's okay because we have some ideas for how we can fix it, don't we?
We do have ideas for how we can fix it. And for once, many of these things are things we actually have direct personal control over and can solve in our personal lives.
It's going to be amazing. All right, we will be right back.
We will. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reject Modernity, Embrace Tradition. When we left you, we were just about to tell you about all of the things we can do personally to solve this loneliness problem. But before we get into that, we should note that there are some actual policy solutions that we should focus on here, sort of specifically related to this decline of third places and the accessibility of those third places to most people. So, Megan, what are some of those things that we can do at a policy level before we focus on the personal?
At a policy level, we can do things like encourage the creation or maintenance of free third places like community centers, libraries, parks, other places where people don't need to spend money to spend time necessarily. We can also be encouraging policies that keep these spaces accessible for everyone and encourage people to use them. In some communities, that's going to mean a compassionate and possibly housing first approach to one's unhoused population, because those are folks that tend to use those spaces because they have no place else to use them. So if you are saying, oh, I don't really want to go to the library, it's kind of gross, it's not well maintained, think about why that is. Do you need more money spent on your library because it's not well maintained? Do you need other services for folks who are using the library as their service provider of last resort? How can we maintain those spaces so that they're accessible for everybody who just wants to spend time in a public place for free?
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that like all of those kinds of free third places are exactly the kind that really fell apart immediately following the Great Recession and the financial crisis, right? Like, in a way that, like, even though sort of funding levels, at least prior to the current administration, had largely recovered by the time that we got to the COVID-19 pandemic and saw a large influx of funding during the Biden administration, they were already dealing with that lost decade of funding, right? In the same way that universities were. And so in the same way that, like, even though university tuition actually dipped in 2023 for the first time in a really long time, it was still super high because it had grown so much over the preceding 15, 20 years. And in the same way that you got money for libraries and community centers and parks, they were in such disrepair because they'd had that lost decade of funding
that
that
deferred maintenance, etc.
that the work still isn't done. The work still isn't done. And so that's like something that you can actually focus on at a state and municipal level, right? Like, you don't need the Trump administration to fund construction of local parks and community centers. Would it be helpful? Yes, sure. But you can, as a community, advocate for your community prioritizing that kind of spending.
Absolutely. Businesses can be third spaces too. And I would suggest that we need to encourage business development in our communities. Things like, as we keep talking about, bars, coffee shops, restaurants, bookstores, whatever you have that is a place where you want to spend some time, that can be a place where you can meet and interact with your community, make friends. And further, I would say allowing for mixed use neighborhoods will facilitate that even more. It doesn't necessarily help if you have to get in your car and drive to your local strip mall to hang out at a Starbucks. You will be more able to have those sort of frequent, repeated interactions that are unplanned with people in your community if it's the coffee shop down the street from your house versus the coffee shop that you have to deliberately go and drive to, and then maybe just go through the drive-through at.
Yeah, and I think this is like a really big distinction that you see between like areas that are already fairly urban, mixed use, like walkable, mixed density even, right? And like suburbs, right? Because I think we sort of don't have a great conception of just how big neighborhoods actually are relative to commercial spaces, right? Like I feel like I have a pretty decent grasp on this because I am a runner and I prefer not to run on commercial corridors because I don't want to stop at stoplights. And so I'm running through neighborhoods all the time. And there is just so much land area where we have totally excluded any sort of commercial activity, right? And yes, maybe we do want to stop like a target from being dropped right in the middle of a residential neighborhood, right? Like we don't necessarily need that scale of development, perhaps, at least within a neighborhood that already exists, right? Maybe there shouldn't be a prohibition on it in new neighborhoods or whatever, but in existing neighborhoods, you want to keep some sort of sense of scale, perhaps. But
I
there's
also
no
ask people to kind of think a little bit about why it is that they don't want that target. Is it you think the parking lot's going to be huge and parking lots are a place where crime congregates? What is the actual reason?
are
My
you
my house backs up to a shop right now, and other than the fact that they apparently have a different garbage collection schedule than I do, there's nothing problematic or annoying about the fact that I have a carpet shop and rug cleaning business next door. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, to this point, like maybe even, like when we talk about like a store like a Target, even that would be, fine, I think, perhaps, if there were space for it in most neighborhoods. But like you might think, oh, well, we want to keep like truly like noxious uses out of neighborhoods. Like maybe we don't want, like a waste treatment plant in the residential neighborhood, whether that's single family or multifamily. Or maybe you don't want, a nightclub dropped in the middle of a neighborhood because that's like an actual nuisance to the people that live there. But like, there's no good reason really why you shouldn't be able to have, a coffee shop in like on the corner in a neighborhood, right? Or you shouldn't be able to have a bookstore or like a yoga studio, right? Like, there's no reason why these kinds of uses cannot coexist with both houses, condos, apartment buildings, townhomes, what have you, right? They coexist all over the world and indeed in many parts of the United States, right? In places that were built out before the era of like car dependent suburban sprawl, like certain areas in Portland and Seattle that I'm sure you're familiar with, Megan, New York, Boston, San Francisco, even certain parts of like notoriously car dependent Los Angeles in like West Hollywood and Culver City, right? Like you have businesses that coexist like pretty harmoniously, right? With Chicago as well, right? Pretty harmoniously with residential uses nearby. And, I think that really helps with the social connectedness of those places and improves people's access to those third places we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I would argue any place that you can have a church, you can have a commercial business.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Because you see in many communities have no problem with having a church because it's intensely used only maybe part of the week, but you have the big parking lots, you have traffic issues, you have et cetera,
also,
et cetera.
lots of churches have children's centers nowadays, and so they are used more frequently. And like nobody really objects to that, like daycare being there at the church, right? I mean, to this point, like the church that my mom was a pastor at in Portland when I was a kid was right across the street from like a little corner store called Porcelli's Deli. And my favorite thing to do as like a 6-year-old was after we got out of church, I'd go across the street to the little deli and I'd go and look through all the stuff, I think that is now a coffee shop, but to the point of like these places can coexist in neighborhoods. Like that is still a business, still right across the street from a church, and the neighborhood is fine, right? The neighborhood is totally fine.
Yep, absolutely. So those are our big policy kind of recommendations for situations like this: walkable neighborhoods, mixed use, encouraging community centers, libraries, parks, etc., more public spaces where people can meet and gather. And now we get to the very, very actionable things you as an individual listener can do to increase the social connectedness in your own life and in your community. Um, I have phrased this in possibly the most nerdy way I could think of.
Okay.
But what I do want to suggest to you is quite literally social office hours.
That is the nerdiest way you could possibly have framed it.
Okay, well, see, you and I both know exactly what I'm talking about, though. So there.
This is TA speak for all of you.
I hear a fair amount of concern when we talk about something like this. Either that, it's kind of our revealed preference that we don't actually want to spend time together because we don't, or it's a coordination issue, that it's too hard to find a time. But quite frankly, pick a 2-hour window once a week and go to the coffee shop and let your friends know if they want to hang out, come hang out, etc., and see what happens. Maybe you just interact with strangers at the coffee shop, maybe you hang out with your friends, but it seems to me that that's maybe the lowest stress way to actually ensure social interaction has a space in your life every week.
And it's just like extremely like low stakes, right? Like you can just do it every week and whoever can make it, right? Like to this point, a group of us in the PhD program do working at a coffee shop on Tuesday mornings in a coffee shop in West Hollywood. Like we're just there from like 9:30 to noon basically. And it's whoever can make it in a given week comes. Like last week there were like 5 or 6 of us. This week there were 3. And it's like absolutely not a pressured thing, right? Like if you can't make it in a given week, nobody's gonna be like, damn, Megan, why weren't you at the coffee shop today? Right? Like we'd scheduled that time to hang out. Like, no, right? Like it's an incredibly, incredibly low stakes, low stress way to get yourself having a little bit more social interaction. And it doesn't even need to be that interactive, right? Like there's sort of the together
You're
apart.
sitting there together. You're co-working.
Like the together apart sort of thing, right? Like you don't always need to be yapping it up with your friends when you're sitting together, right? Like sometimes it is just enough to work for 45 minutes, take a tiny break, see something funny on your phone, show it to your friend, and then go back to working for another half an hour, right? Like that is already way better than like just sitting at home alone, right? And even if no one's able to make it in a given week, or no one makes it the first or the second week that you do this, right? There's always the chance that you're going to meet a new person actually there at the coffee shop, right? And it's just like, yeah, I'm belaboring the point at this juncture, but like, it is something that we started doing in the cohort, and it has just made my like regular social life and like regular level of social interaction, and quite frankly, just my like general mental health way better to know that like no matter like sort of what's going on in the rest of the week, like that 3-hour stretch is gonna be like chill and I'll just sit there and work with friends.
Yeah, it and it is just that easy. My experience in law school, which much like the PhD is not, law school is not widely known as a time when you're chill and your mental health is good. But we had kind of a social convention where there was one person who every week, every Friday, sent an email to the entire law school saying, we are going to be at XYZ bar starting at 8. Come if you can. And this is fairly widely known. A lot of schools do this. We called it bar review, and I think most people do too. That was, you'd get, 40 people out of a population of maybe 400 who showed up fairly regularly. And not only are you making friends with the people that you hang out with once a week and just decompress and debrief with, I made friends with a lot of bartenders. And you're interacting, and because it was Salem, Oregon, which is the state capital, like you're also talking to legislators, which was weird, but also like people who work in state government, people who are there for other reasons, and you're just getting out of the house for maybe that's your only non-work related couple of hours a week that you are not doing anything. And it was just a very, very good way to maintain that social connection. But it's just one person plans it and people just show up if they can. And that's all, really. And it's just a great time. Now, it's not the social norm for millennials and probably not for Gen Z either, but this is really just kind of a new take on just dropping by. You
Yeah, like I mean,
swing by somebody's house.
it seems weird to talk about it in like the sort of way that we've been socialized the last decade and a half or so. But like you can just invite your friends to do things, man. Like you can just invite people to do stuff, right? Like you don't need to have this like big production plan, right? Like you can just invite people over for like a spur of the moment movie night, right? Like it doesn't need to be a big deal. Like not all
think about what you did in college, quite frankly, and it's just that.
Not all not all social interactions need to be a whole thing, right? Like you can just do like chill stuff, right? Like if you're hosting it, you can host a formal dinner party if you want. But if you want your friends to come over for dinner, you can just say, yeah, come over for dinner. We'll order some pizzas and we'll watch like, the Twilight Saga, right? Like you can just do stuff. People can just do things. There's no rule against it. And it's a little weird to me that we have this like, I don't know if calling it social anxiety is quite right, but this like, as you sort of mentioned up at the top of like this personal section, like this fear that people don't actually like you and they don't want to hang out with you. And if you invite them over, they're going to cut you off. Like,
also, if your friends are like that, fuck them, get new friends.
Yeah, like frankly, right? Like again,
not
like
for nothing.
Yeah,
getting in our one F-bomb per episode.
Yeah, making sure that I have to check the explicit content box on the fucking. There we go, and it did another one.
Okay, no, I honestly, but that I like. There's no better way to phrase that. If your friends are people who like get mad at you for inviting them to do things, you need new friends. And so you should go hang out in a coffee shop and meet some. But like it blows my mind. But yes, just invite your friends to do stuff. And if they can't come, they can't come, but it's not a like, oh, I hate you kind of thing. Like let's relax.
And to focus even more in on the point, just because they can't do the thing that you ask them to do doesn't mean they are not interested in hanging out at all. Right? Like just last night, I like went over to my neighbor's apartment and we had like a game night with some friends. But like that game night, took like a little bit of doing to figure out when we were all free. Right? Like originally it was going to be last week and then I was gone in Seattle and then it was going to be over the weekend and then someone had like, plans with their family. And so it was just like going back and forth over text for a little bit of like being, okay, what day could we all do this? And we could all do it Wednesday evening around 7, right? So it's like, it's not that none of us wanted to hang out. It's not that we didn't want to spend time with each other and do stuff. It's that we were busy on a given day and we just needed that next little bit of like energy and time to find a time that worked for everyone. And so I think another part of this, like taking ownership of this and doing this personally, is like when your friends ask you to hang out and you can't, or if they tell you they can't, like don't immediately assume that it's because they don't want to hang out in the first place. Like ask them if there are other times that would work for them before you just sort of write off the entire endeavor as a failure.
Society has come up with a solution for this. Hashtag not sponsored, but a doodle poll will be helpful for you. And so I don't really want to get into, again, I don't want to get into the male loneliness epidemic. We do know the same statistical organizations that I talked about up at the top of the episode do tell us that men have fewer friends than women. And one of the reasons we think that might be is that men are not socialized to prioritize interpersonal connections in the same way women are. Men specifically might want to consider making a point of prioritizing friendships and making friends.
Just to point out, as a man who is not lonely,
Yeah.
again, like, not to be a fucking asshole here, because I know it is hard for some people. And, like, I know that, like, you know, I am, like, a easygoing, like, tall, conventionally attractive dude who people do not find off-putting to, like, look at or whatever, right?
Not having an off-putting demeanor is helpful
Right,
in this
like,
situation.
I understand that I come at this from a position where this is not difficult for me. But quite frankly, again, skill issue, dudes. Like, not to be an asshole, but you can't expect everyone to just deal with the fact that you can't relate to people on an interpersonal level. Go to fucking therapy and learn how to talk to people, right? Like,
Yep,
I know we've been talking.
Talk to your bros. Talk to your bros about your feelings.
Like, I don't know, man. Like, it's just as someone who has, like, never been, like, even sort of tangentially, like attracted to this pipeline, it is just so strange to me that people are not willing to, like, even countenance the idea of self-improvement, right? Like,
it is hard for some people. I do want to kind of,
yes,
it is, I will accept for them that they find it difficult, but it is still something that can be improved by them.
I think that the like the way that this has always been described to me, and the way that I find it useful to think about, is that, like, the difficulty in cultivating these personal, interpersonal skills explains why this is difficult for you. It explains why you are having trouble, but it is not an excuse, right? It's an explanation, not an excuse. And there isn't an excuse for refusing to work on yourself in a way that will help you have more friends, a better social circle, and, like, be connected with people who you actually jive with, rather than people who, you know, you can't find connection with. Again, we don't want to get too far. We don't
be friends with people who make you feel bad about yourself is another really good side point there. But again, another thing that people might need to go talk to their therapist about, ask people for help with things. And I know this might feel weird and hard. I am not your therapist. But we know from psychology research that doing people favors makes you like them more and creates a bond in your mind. So giving people the opportunity to do things for you will strengthen those social connections if that's what you're looking to do. Letting people help you forms community.
Yeah. And I also think there's an element here of, you know, like, giving yourself grace, right? Because I feel like people who are often very hard on themselves, right, are much less hard on other people. And I think the inverse is true, that people who are really hard on others are rarely hard on themselves, right? And there's a degree to which both of these people need to work on that, right? But
everybody needs therapy for everybody. Everybody needs to talk to somebody.
I mean, like, not wrong exactly, right? Like, maybe not everyone needs to do, like, formal therapy, right? But, like, there should be a degree of introspection that everyone has, right? And I think if you are maybe too introspective, or you are not willing to give yourself the benefit of the doubt, not willing to give yourself any grace, think about how you are, like, willing to, like, give other people, you know, the benefit of the doubt. Think about how your friends, you're, like, you know, you're thinking about, like, you're so worried about, like, making them upset and inconveniencing them, right? That you're like, oh, well, but what if, and you never do that for yourself, right? Like, give yourself a little bit of credit in a way that you give other people credit. And I think that really helps. At least it helped me during, you know, some of the difficult times in my life, understand that no, people don't actually hate me. I'm not the worst, right? Like, that's all something I've made up for myself.
Yes.
And, like, realizing that although we are all the protagonists in our own narrative, as Megan has said before on the podcast, right? That doesn't mean that you are, like, uniquely endowed with agency among your friends and family, and you are the only person who can do things wrong.
Absolutely. One more very specific subset of something like that. I kind of in my head described this as a social Sherpa, which I just kind of think of as if you have a friend or acquaintance who is very comfortable doing a thing that you are maybe less comfortable with but want to do, you can specifically ask them to go do that thing for or with you, and it is more likely that you will get it done. This is just a very silly example, but I wanted appropriately, given the time that we were recording this, I really wanted to go see Conclave like the week it came out. And I asked my uncle, who I thought would like the movie. I'm like, and who is a single man who is very good at going out and doing social things. I'm like, hey, do you want to go see this movie with me? He says, yeah, sure, absolutely. And so fits it into his busy schedule. And we went and we saw Conclave and we had a great time. And I didn't get it spoiled for me because I went the week it came out.
I mean,
So that was
say what you
great.
will, they've got a terrific marketing campaign, right?
Oh my God. I got to tell you, speaking of going and doing social things, I went to mass for like the first time in 5 years on Sunday, and I feel really bad for everything that happened afterwards.
I've been seeing a bunch of videos on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram of people being like, when you've been talking with your therapist in therapy about how like nothing bad will happen if you eat meat on Friday during Lent, and then you do, and then immediately the Pope dies.
Papa Francesco, we love you. Okay, anyway.
Anyway,
Speaking of people who really prioritize community and being there for others.
Truly. I will say on this topic of like social Sherpas, though, people who can help you do the things that you're sort of not as adept at or whatever, like, you know, most of the time, if you have a friend who is good at those things and who likes doing those things, they will be so happy that you want to do those things with them, right? Like I've recently started, I run regularly, right? Like I run alone all the time, but I have recently started running on the weekends when I can with our good friend Josh Getz, who is much more in shape and a much faster runner than I am. But he doesn't mind that when we do a 10K together, I need to take it at a 9.5 minute pace, right? Even though he could take it at like an 8 minute pace. He doesn't mind. He enjoys going on the run and talking about shit while we go on the run together, right? Like your friends like doing the things that they do. They're gonna be like very happy that you want to join them in one of their favorite pastimes.
I think that's exactly it. And don't be afraid of being bad at things or holding them back. And again, if your friend is a person who gets mad at you for holding them back at the thing that they enjoy doing, you can just not do that with them again and also like find new friends. Now you know that about your relationship with that person and you can make decisions accordingly.
I think the overarching thing that we want to really get across here as we sort of come to the end is that like you can just do things, people. You really can. Like you can just go out and do things. Like there are barriers.
This is an intensely policy focused podcast, but you can just go do stuff.
Yeah, like we talked for half an hour about how this has become all of these barriers, the decline in third places, right? How this has become harder for people, right? But part of getting back to a situation where those things are easier for people to do, more accessible for people to access, like part of that is going and doing the things again, right? Like if you have this like, because we've basically had the demand for these kinds of things have like two very close together like cataclysmic events that have cratered people's interest in doing those things in a way that like is completely unrelated to whether those things are actually desirable or fun to do in the first place, right? Like the pandemic and the Great Recession like didn't make it less fun to hang out with friends. They just made it harder to do so, right? And if we want to make it easier to do that, then we need to start by doing the things again and showing people, reminding people, right? That like why we liked to do them in the first place and why we invested as a society in structures and infrastructure that made those things possible.
Absolutely.
And with that, given that this is an optimistic episode of the podcast, I will not say until we do any of these things, because you are all going to go out tomorrow and do something with your friends. Every single one of you that is listening to this podcast All of you. This podcast comes out on Monday. You have a whole week to do stuff with your friends. I don't want to hear any of you guys. Report back. Yes, exactly. You have a whole week to do stuff with your friends. Have fun. Get social. Go out and drink on Friday night. I don't care what it is, right? You have a whole week. Optimistic episode of the podcast. Optimistic Clayton. I have been Optimistic Clayton.
Been Optimistic Megan.
And we will see you guys next week after you've hung out with your friends.